Hi, I'm the man who got left at the altar. Not just left, publicly abandoned. 200 people watched as my fiancée ran off with someone else. But what haunted me wasn't the silence in that church. It was what she yelled over her shoulder. "You're a mistake." I thought that was the end, but I was wrong. Because what happened next, what no one saw coming, is the reason she'll never forget my name. I remember thinking, right up until the last minute, that everything felt strangely ordinary. The church on Main Street smelled the way old buildings always do. Polished wood, dust warmed by sunlight, a faint hint of flowers that had been arranged early that morning. Light filtered through the stained glass and landed in uneven colors on the floor, broken reds and blues that shifted as clouds passed outside. I stood at the altar, shoulders squared, holding the bouquet the florist had handed me an hour earlier. White roses. Simple. Clean. Practical. Just like we'd agreed. I wasn't nervous in the romantic sense. No racing heart. No shaking hands. I've never been wired that way. I've always been the person who keeps things steady. The one who makes sure the bills are paid, the plans are followed, the calm stays intact even when others spiral. Standing there, I told myself this was just another moment where steadiness mattered. Then the doors at the back of the church opened. Not slowly, not with hesitation. They swung wide, the hinges letting out a sound that cut through the quiet like a crack in glass. My fiancée didn't look at me. She didn't look at her parents, or the minister, or anyone else who had gathered to witness what they thought was a wedding. She walked straight down the aisle, her heels clicking sharp and fast against the floor. She wasn't alone. The man beside her had his hand on her back, guiding her, familiar in a way that didn't need explanation. A few heads turned. Someone inhaled sharply. No one spoke. I didn't move. I didn't call out her name. I didn't chase after them like people do in movies. My feet stayed planted where they were, as if the floor itself had decided for me. At the front, just before the doors closed behind them, she stopped. She turned around then, finally looked at me. Her face wasn't panicked. It wasn't conflicted. It was resolved, clean, as if she'd already crossed whatever line this moment represented and left the consequences behind. "I can't marry you," she said. The words landed flat, almost polite. Then she added the part that stuck. "You're a mistake." Not a pause, not a tremor, just that. A sentence delivered and released into the room. I felt it settle somewhere deep, heavier than the sound of the doors closing, heavier than the act of leaving itself. A mistake wasn't something you argued with. It was something you erased. Around me, the room changed. Chairs creaked as people shifted. A program slipped from someone's lap and hit the floor with a soft slap. I noticed things I had no reason to notice. A cough, a throat being cleared, eyes dropping away when they realized I was looking back. 200 people sat there, breathing, watching. No one stood up. No one said a word. The minister's hands rested on the open book in front of him, unmoving, as if he'd forgotten what came next. In that silence, I understood something without being told. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was judgment by omission. My mind tried to organize it, to explain it in steps. That part of me failed. All that remained was the fact of my body refusing to cooperate. I was still holding the bouquet, My fingers were locked around the stems so tightly that my knuckles ached, but I couldn't make myself let go. My chest rose and fell in short, uneven pulls of air that didn't feel like breathing at all. Time stretched in an unnatural way. Seconds felt padded, heavy, resistant. Then someone touched my shoulder. Not a grab, not a demand, just a steady hand, warm through the fabric of my jacket. I didn't turn right away. I only registered that in a room full of people who had chosen stillness, one person had chosen otherwise. I didn't know who she was yet, but that single touch stopped me from disappearing right there. She didn't let go. Her hand stayed on my shoulder, light but steady, as if she knew pulling away too soon would leave me in pieces. I took one more breath, not deep, not cleansing, just enough to move, and then I turned and stepped down from the altar. No one said a word. The aisle stretched out longer than I remembered walking it in rehearsal. As I passed each row, I saw people I'd known for years. Neighbors, co-workers, folks from the diner who always asked about my mom's health. Even the couple who used to lend us their snowblower every winter. But none of them looked me in the eye. A few gave me those half smiles people use when they don't want to pick a side. Others just stared ahead, like they were waiting for a commercial break. I made it to the doors without interruption. The stranger walked with me. Outside, the sunlight hit differently. It felt too bright, like it didn't belong to the same world I'd just walked out of. I paused at the bottom of the steps, unsure what to do next. I hadn't driven myself. My phone was in the church office. I had nowhere to go, and no one asking me to stay. Behind me, the church doors stayed closed. She stepped around so I could see her fully. Early 40s, maybe. Sharp eyes, but not cold. Brown hair pulled back, wearing a navy dress and practical flats. She didn't fidget or fill the space with pity. "You need air," she said. "Let's sit." It wasn't a suggestion. It was something a nurse might say to a patient trying to leave the ER too soon. Direct, but not unkind. She led me to a stone bench just around the side walkway of the church. We sat. I heard voices behind the stained glass windows, movement, people whispering, but nobody came out. I cleared my throat, then realized I hadn't spoken since the moment she left me at the altar. My own voice felt foreign. I didn't know what to say that didn't sound ridiculous or broken. She handed me a water bottle. "Don't worry, I didn't bring tissues," she added. "That always feels like asking someone to perform grief." I nodded, grateful for the practicality. The water gave me something to hold, something to do. "You from around here?" I asked. "No," she said. "I was passing through. The woman who sings at weddings here is my cousin. I stopped by to drop off a book she left at my place." So she hadn't even been invited. "What made you step in?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly. "You looked like someone being erased in real time." We sat in silence, not the kind that demands words, the kind that lets a person exist without being watched. Inside, I caught a glimpse of my mother through the window. She stood near the front pew, clutching her purse, whispering to my sister. Neither of them had come to check on me. Maybe they assumed I needed space. Maybe they didn't want to be associated with the embarrassment. Maybe they were just confused, like everyone else. Still, The woman beside me had no obligation, no history with me. But she stayed. "I've always thought," she said after a while, "that the worst part of public pain isn't the event. It's the silence that follows it. People think they're helping by pretending it didn't happen. But silence is a verdict." I felt that one. It landed cleaner than any of the canned sympathy I'd probably get later. "What's your name?" I finally asked. She told me. I repeated it softly, more to ground myself than to remember. She didn't try to explain what had happened, didn't ask for details. She simply sat there like she understood that my internal world had split open and needed time to be rearranged. I still hadn't cried. Not because I was holding it in, but because there was nothing left to release. I was numb, empty, watching myself from the outside. She didn't rush me through it. Instead, after a few minutes, she said one thing, one question. It wasn't about my ex. It wasn't even about the wedding. She looked at me and asked, "When did you start believing you had to earn being chosen?" Her question followed me home, and it was the first time I wondered if this hadn't been an accident at all. I drove home with the windows down, even though the air had turned cool. I needed noise, wind, tires on pavement, anything to drown out the echoes of that question. When did you start believing you had to earn being chosen? It followed me through each stoplight, into my driveway, up the creaky steps, and through the front door. My house, quiet as always, greeted me with the usual. The faint smell of wood polish, the lamp I forgot to turn off in the hallway, and the coat I'd tossed across the armchair 2 nights ago. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, and yet nothing felt the same. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't touch my phone. I just sat on the edge of my bed, in the dark, elbows on my knees, staring into nothing. You expect a kind of emotional breakdown after a moment like that. Crying, rage, something dramatic. But the truth was, all I felt was silence. And silence at that hour gets loud. The ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen pulsed like a heartbeat. The fridge let out a groan, then settled back into its low hum. The house had never felt smaller. My suit was still on, tie loose, jacket slung over the chair. The white rose boutonniere, slightly bruised now, drooped at the edge of the nightstand. And still, I hadn't cried. I hadn't even wanted to. That was the part that started to bother me. Shouldn't I have chased her? Shouldn't I have run out of the church like a man desperate not to lose the love of his life? But I hadn't. Not even for a second. And the more I sat with that truth, the more it told me something about myself that I hadn't dared admit before. I was tired. Not just physically, this was deeper. Worn down from years of being the steady one, the one who adjusted, who absorbed, who smoothed over the rough edges of someone else's mess and called it love. I'd spent most of my adult life apologizing for things I didn't do, explaining my intentions, making room, making peace, bending. And when I didn't bend fast enough, it somehow became my fault for not being easy. That question, that woman's question, had torn something open, and now I couldn't stop the memories from lining up. The time she changed our vacation plans without telling me, then blamed it on my bad timing. The way conversation stopped when I entered the room during dinner with her friends. How decisions about our finances, the guest list, even the wedding vows were made for us without ever including me. One or two of those things I could have brushed off, but together, they built a case. And then, in the middle of the night, one detail rose to the surface like a fish breaking still water. 2 weeks before the wedding, she'd insisted on handling the final seating chart herself. "I've got it under control," she'd said. "Less for you to stress about." At the time, I was swamped at work. I thanked her for stepping up. But now, something about that moment struck me as too smooth, too final. I remembered the look she gave me, calm, almost relieved, like something had already been decided. I sat up straighter in bed. It wasn't just the seating chart. It was the cake tasting I'd been accidentally left out of. The vendor meeting that got moved at the last minute. The way her brother suddenly stopped calling me man and started calling me dude, like we were distant again. They knew. Not all of them, but someone did. The exit at the church. It hadn't been chaos. It had been a routine, practiced, clean. She hadn't cried, hadn't even stuttered. Her line was delivered like it had been rehearsed. "I can't marry you. You're a mistake." That wasn't heat of the moment cruelty. That was branding. They'd made a choice, one I wasn't in the room for. And maybe that was the part that burned the most. Not just the betrayal, but how organized it had been. How comfortable she looked walking away. How nobody looked surprised. I stood and paced slowly to the kitchen, the floor cool under my feet. I poured a glass of water and stared out the window at the empty street. I didn't call anyone, didn't scream, didn't throw the glass. I needed to understand it, all of it. The timeline, the people, the choices. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of reacting like a man scorned and broken. I wasn't broken, just awake. And if this had been planned, then reacting too soon would only give them exactly what they expected. Sleep never came. I watched the window shift from black to blue as morning bled into the walls. The birds outside didn't care about betrayal. They chirped like it was any Monday. By the time the phone rang, I was already at the kitchen table, half a cup of coffee gone cold in front of me. The caller ID flashed. Dad. I let it ring twice before answering. Habit, not hesitation. His voice came steady, measured, not warm, but not cold either. Just practiced. "Hey, son. Just checking in." A pause. "We're all concerned." That word, concerned, landed funny. Like I was a situation to be managed. "We know things got out of hand yesterday," he continued. "But this doesn't need to get messy." I stayed quiet, stirred my coffee even though there was nothing left to stir. "You know your mother's been up all night," he added, worried sick. "And the rest of the family, well, they're trying to process everything too." Process what, exactly? The fact that no one stopped her? That not one of them followed me out? That processing meant falling in line? We all just want to move past this without anyone doing something they'll regret. There it was. That wasn't a check-in. That was containment. Then came the phrase I could have recited before he said it. Be the bigger person. It hit like a verdict. Polished, rehearsed, weaponized through generations. That old idea that if you don't speak, if you absorb the blow quietly, it means you've grown. I took a breath and let the silence stretch. Not to make a point, just to make space for myself. "You still there?" he asked. "Yeah," I said finally. Another pause. "We've all made sacrifices. This family's reputation doesn't come easy." Sacrifices. Reputation. The same words I heard growing up every time someone tried to stuff a secret under the rug. When my uncle's affair came out, don't talk about it. When my cousin left town pregnant at 19, it's a private family matter. And now, when a bride walks out mid-vows with another man, it's me who's expected to swallow the shame. I almost agreed, out of instinct, but I stopped myself. This wasn't concern. This was control, wrapped in civility. "I'm not planning on saying anything," I said calmly. "Not yet." "That's good," he replied too quickly. "That's wise." He sounded relieved, but he didn't ask how I was, didn't ask if I needed anything. The only thing that mattered was that I stay quiet. When we hung up, I sat there, letting the words settle like dust. Then I got up and walked to the small file cabinet in the hallway closet. I pulled out the folders with wedding paperwork, contracts, deposits, the catering agreement, joint accounts we'd just started setting up. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for clarity. I sat back down at the table and began reading. Page by page, the details came into focus. There was a catering change made 2 days before the ceremony, my signature on it. Except I hadn't signed it. It was scanned in. The handwriting was mine, but it wasn't me. The address on one invoice was wrong, off by 1 digit, but the zip code led to a P.O. box downtown. The florist's confirmation email had been redirected to her personal account, not ours. None of it was criminal. Not yet. But it was all curated. Like someone had been editing the picture before it was taken. I wasn't angry. I was alert. And for the first time, I understood what silence could do. It could wait. It could notice. It could learn the pattern before confronting the designer. No one expected me to sit quietly and start pulling thread from the seams. That morning, I didn't return any more calls. I didn't text back the 3 people who'd finally messaged. "Thinking of you. So sorry." They weren't sorry when it happened. They were sorry they didn't look up fast enough. Late in the afternoon, I found one note in the stack that didn't fit. It was small, a receipt for a rehearsal dinner reservation. But the date was off. It was booked a week before the wedding. She'd told me it was canceled due to her brother's schedule. But the restaurant confirmed the table had been used. 6 people. Her family only. That detail stayed with me all day. And by evening, the town had started telling a story I knew wasn't true. The wind shifted sometime overnight. By Tuesday morning, the air outside had that crisp Pennsylvania bite to it, cool enough to remind you summer was long gone, not quite cold enough to make it official. I threw on a sweatshirt, grabbed my keys, and decided I'd start the day by walking to the diner instead of making breakfast at home. I thought the fresh air might clear my head. The bell above the door jingled the same way it always had. The smell of coffee and fried eggs hit me like muscle memory. Betty, who usually called me sweetheart before I even sat down, gave a polite nod from behind the counter, then turned back toward the coffee pot, a second too fast. I took my regular booth by the window. It was already empty. Like someone knew I was coming. 10 minutes passed. No coffee. No menus. Across the room, two women I'd known since high school sat stiff as mannequins, whispering. One of them glanced my way, then quickly looked down at her plate, like I'd caught her stealing. The silence was louder than the jukebox. Eventually, a young guy I didn't recognize came over with a lukewarm pot of coffee and said, "You, want anything else?" "Just eggs," I said. He didn't write it down, didn't smile, just nodded and walked away like he didn't want to be seen talking to me. The food came fast. I wasn't sure if that was kindness or a silent request for me to finish and go. I ate in near silence, except for the occasional scrape of utensils from the other tables. No small talk. No good mornings. No one asked how I was holding up, and no one, not one person, asked what really happened in that church. It hit me then. This town had already decided. By the time I left the diner, it wasn't just a bad memory I was carrying. It was a shadow that walked ahead of me, reaching people before I could. I saw it in the cashier's forced smile at the grocery store when I stopped for milk, in the way a woman from our neighborhood, who used to ask about my dog every time she saw me, pretended to study the produce like she hadn't seen me at all. Nobody yelled, nobody pointed. They just erased me, neatly. Quietly. That afternoon, I pulled into the lot outside my workplace, an office where I'd spent 10 years showing up early and leaving late. A couple of coworkers were standing near the entrance. They stopped talking the second they saw me. One of them gave a tight-lipped nod. The other one turned away to fake check something on his phone. I parked, sat for a few minutes, then started the car again and drove right back out. I didn't have it in me to walk inside. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the feeling of being misunderstood in a way that stuck, like my name had been pinned to a bulletin board labeled "problem." And the worst part? I hadn't said a word. I'd followed their advice. I'd been reasonable. I'd stayed above it. But the silence didn't protect me. It buried me. Tuesday night, I found myself staring at the papers on my desk again, the same ones I'd been reviewing the day before. My eyes drifted to the unsigned forms, the joint accounts still technically open, the wedding contract cancellation clause. I picked up a pen and hovered it over the dotted line. A small part of me wanted to just end it. Sign, walk away, vanish. Start over in some town where no one knew my name, where no one could say, "I heard he lost it after she left him." Or worse, he was the reason she ran. That thought of disappearing was the first one that actually gave me peace in 2 days, and that scared me more than anything else. The next morning, Wednesday, I drove out early, trying to avoid any run-ins. I needed groceries and figured going right when the store opened might let me slip in and out unnoticed. It almost worked. As I turned down the baking aisle, a woman pushing a cart with 2 toddlers passed me. She looked familiar, maybe a friend of my ex-fiancée's sister. We made brief eye contact. I gave a polite smile. She didn't smile back. Instead, she mumbled, just loud enough for me to hear, "Men like that always pretend they didn't see it coming." She wasn't talking to me. She was talking at me. And just like that, something cracked. Not big, not loud, but enough. I kept walking, finished my shopping, and drove home without turning the radio on. The groceries sat on the counter while I leaned against the kitchen sink, staring out at the backyard like it might offer an answer. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught my reflection in the window. I didn't see someone angry. I didn't even see someone heartbroken. I saw a man who'd been bending himself into quiet shapes for years just to keep things calm, just to keep the peace, just to be reasonable. And the saddest part? It had worked until the moment it didn't. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't going to stop on its own. So I stopped waiting. Late Wednesday afternoon, the sun was just beginning its slow slide behind the rooftops. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through an old folder, contracts, invoices, a few emails I'd printed for clarity. There was something oddly comforting about paper. You could mark it up, leave fingerprints. Unlike people, it couldn't deny what was already said. That's when my phone lit up. Her name. No photo, no greeting, just that name. Small, sharp, sitting on the screen like it hadn't shattered me 3 days earlier. I stared at it for a second, then opened the message. It was short, polite, cold. Would you be available to meet tomorrow? Just briefly. I need to discuss something with you. No mention of the wedding, no apology, not even a "hope you're doing okay." I reread it, wondering if someone else had written it for her. It read like a business transaction. And maybe that's exactly what it was. I didn't respond right away. I went for a walk instead, let the fall air hit my face. Tried to decide whether I was angry or just tired of pretending I wasn't. By Thursday morning, I agreed to meet on my terms. I chose a small parking lot across town, one that used to sit behind a hardware store that went out of business last year. It was neutral, empty, no eyes, no memories. She pulled in right on time. Same car, same posture. Same carefully pressed blouse that told the world she was composed, untouched. She stepped out, offered a nod. Not warm, not cold, just efficient. "Thanks for meeting," she said. Her voice was soft, but it had that tone she used when she wanted to skip over anything uncomfortable. "I won't take much of your time." I said nothing. Just leaned against the hood of my car and waited. She didn't waste time. "I need your signature," she said. "It's just a formality, something from the venue. There's a clause about forfeiture of deposits, and since the contract was in both our names, they need us both to sign off." I didn't touch the envelope she held out. She kept going. "I already spoke to them. They'll waive the penalty if we get the paperwork in by tomorrow. It's just paperwork, that's all." That's all. I looked at the envelope, then back at her. "You already filled yours out?" She nodded. "Of course. I assumed you'd want to move on." She didn't say, "I assumed you'd agree," but she didn't need to. That's what she always counted on, that I'd make things easy. I opened the envelope slowly, unfolded the papers, and glanced over them. She was right. It looked routine. But one line caught my eye. An early release of funds from the shared account. I tapped that line with my finger. "What's this?" She shifted slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's standard. They just need confirmation for processing. It's nothing complicated." I kept reading. The number listed wasn't small, and it wasn't split down the middle either. "You didn't mention this part," I said. Her tone stayed even. "Because it doesn't change anything. You weren't planning to keep the deposit, were you? I figured it was simpler if I just—" "You figured," I interrupted calmly. She looked at me for the first time then, really looked. And for a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt, not regret, irritation. I folded the paper neatly and tucked it back into the envelope. "I'll need time to go through all of this," I said. She blinked. "Time? It's just a signature." "I don't rush contracts," I replied, still even. "Especially ones I didn't draft." That silence between us, the one that used to feel like miscommunication, now felt like a negotiation. But I wasn't on the back foot anymore. She took a breath, tried again. "I just think, with everything going on, this could be handled quietly, without dragging it out." "There's nothing quiet about what's going on," I said. Not harsh, just honest. "But I get it. You want things tidy, no loose ends." She opened her mouth like she had something to say, but thought better of it. Instead, she gave me a tight smile. "Well, let me know when you've reviewed it." She turned back to her car, heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks. But before she opened the door, I said one last thing. "By the way, you might want to double-check that release clause. It doesn't hold up under the current banking terms." She froze, not visibly, but enough. Her hand paused on the door handle. Then she nodded, got in, and drove away. I stayed in the lot for a few minutes longer, watching the wind scatter a few dried leaves across the concrete. Then I headed home. Back in my office, I sat down with the envelope again. No rush this time. I pulled up some financial records I'd mostly ignored until now. Looked through emails I hadn't bothered to read fully. Slowly, the pieces started to form a picture. It wasn't just about a deposit. There were transfers I hadn't authorized, promises made in both our names, agreements I was listed on that I didn't remember signing. And every single one required both of us to finalize. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't the one with the problem anymore. They needed me. Not emotionally, not socially, legally. I had leverage. Quiet, undeniable. I didn't slam drawers. I didn't call anyone. I just made a fresh folder, labeled it clearly, and set it aside. Next time she came back, I'd be ready. I didn't need revenge. I just needed facts. That was when I realized, if I didn't play along, they were going to try something else. I spent most of Friday watching for it. Not that I knew exactly what to expect, just that something else was coming. And by late afternoon, it did. A white envelope. Heavy, like the paper had been chosen to impress someone. My name printed cleanly across the front. No return address. It sat on the edge of the kitchen table for a while before I opened it. I poured coffee I didn't want, cleaned dishes that were already clean. But it waited, patient, like they always were when they wanted something done quietly. When I finally slid it open, I didn't find a letter, just a folded invitation card. "You are cordially invited to the post-engagement reception and estate review in appreciation of ongoing collaboration and goodwill." There was no mention of what had actually happened, no reference to the canceled wedding, no acknowledgement of the public fracture that had already left bruises across town. It was sanitized, smiling. And beneath the neat font and gold trim, it said more by what it didn't say. There was a list of attendees on the back, people I knew, a few I didn't, names that had always held weight in this town. Mine was at the bottom. No title, no role, just there. It was an invitation to show up, not to speak, not to be heard, just to be seen. As I sat back, the message behind it all settled in. They weren't asking me to be part of anything. They were telling me to sit still, look decent, disappear quietly. That evening passed in fragments. I tried not to overthink it, but the details followed me. Through dinner, through dishes, through the quiet moment I stood at the window, watching the sky go black over the trees. I thought about not going. Why show up to a performance where you're not allowed a line? But then I thought about the whispering that had already taken root, the sideways glances, the poor thing looks wrapped in fake kindness. If I stayed home, they'd take that silence and sculpt it into guilt. If I went, I risked playing the fool again, a backdrop in someone else's success story. Either way felt like losing. Still, I knew I'd go. Not for them, for me. But I wouldn't play the part they wrote. Saturday came overcast, a soft chill in the air. I put on a jacket, one I hadn't worn in a while. No tie, no polish. Just something that looked like I didn't care too much. The venue wasn't far. A community center downtown, converted from an old bank. It still smelled faintly of varnish and paper. People were already there when I arrived. Parking lot half full, laughter drifting through the glass doors. I walked in slow. The room was dressed to impress. White linen, soft music, the kind of lighting that makes everyone look 15 years younger. A buffet table stood like a monument in the middle, untouched, but already admired. And then the shift happened. It was subtle. Conversations paused just a beat too long when I entered. Smiles tightened. One or two people nodded. Most pretended not to see me at all. I moved past them without slowing down, found a seat off to the side where I could see the room but stay mostly out of view. From that chair, I started taking inventory, not of the food, not the decor, but of them. Who avoided me? Who whispered when I passed? Who looked over their shoulder as if my presence might stain something? No one said a word, but the silence pressed louder than if they had. She arrived 30 minutes in, same polished grace, same careful posture. I watched her greet people, touch arms lightly, laugh on cue. If she noticed me, she didn't show it. I noticed her, though, and the man beside her, someone from her father's business circle. The way he stood just close enough to suggest a connection, but not enough to make it official. A placeholder. Maybe a statement. The speeches began. Light, gracious, vague. One of her uncles stood up to thank everyone for their continued support during this period of transition. I watched people nod solemnly, as if a loved one had passed instead of a relationship. No one looked my way, and that, I realized, was the point. My seat existed. My name had been listed, but my presence wasn't welcome. It was strategic. A box checked to say, "See, we invited him." A soft trap to make my silence look like agreement. But I didn't speak. I didn't interrupt. I sat with both feet flat on the floor, hands folded, back straight, and I watched. Because they still believed the setting would tame me, that dressing it in politeness would make it palatable. They thought distance would equal detachment. But what it gave me was clarity. They'd gone this far to orchestrate a narrative, which meant they knew how fragile it really was. I stayed through the whole thing, didn't drink, didn't eat, just kept observing until the crowd thinned, the air cooled, and the lights began to dim. Then I stood. I didn't say goodbye to anyone, just walked out into the night, steady and sure. I wasn't confused anymore. I knew exactly what I was about to do. Not tonight, but soon. They thought inviting me would keep me quiet, but they didn't realize I'd already decided how this would end. The hum in the room had settled into something soft and self-congratulatory. Speeches continued, light and safe, as though nothing truly difficult had ever occurred. They used phrases like moving forward, celebrating shared values, and healing as a family. I listened from my seat near the back of the room, hands resting loosely in my lap, posture calm. I wasn't in any of the photos they projected on the wall, but I was mentioned. Not by name, just, he did the right thing. We're grateful for his maturity. Grace under pressure. Each nod toward me came wrapped in a layer of implication. They assumed that by being here, silent, seated, I had agreed. That I had conceded the narrative, let it pass over me like weather, and chosen not to disturb the atmosphere. They didn't understand the difference between being quiet and being compliant. Not yet. The next transition came like clockwork, just as polished as the rest of the evening. The MC cleared his throat and smiled toward my side of the room. We'd like to take a moment to recognize everyone who helped make this next chapter possible. If you'd be willing, we'd love to invite him up, just for a quick word. Not me, not a name, but every head turned toward me anyway. Dozens of faces, not cold, not angry, just expectant. This was the moment they believed they had won. I stood slowly, not with drama, but with purpose. My heart didn't race, my palms didn't sweat. Everything felt quiet, like the air had been held in place. I didn't walk to the front. I didn't touch the microphone. Instead, I turned to face the room, just enough so I could see them all clearly, and spoke in an even voice. I will not be signing anything. That was it. No build-up, no anger, no story, just one sentence. A fact, not a threat. The kind of sentence that can't be softened, reworded, or dismissed as confusion. I saw it land. It didn't crash into the room. It unsettled it. People blinked, shifted in their chairs. One man coughed. Someone dropped a fork. The MC gave a polite half-laugh, the way you do when you hope someone is joking, but know they're not. I didn't wait. I turned, walked through the side aisle, and exited through the rear doors without glancing back. Outside, the air felt heavier than when I arrived. The sky had gone navy, streetlights flickering on, as if the town itself was adjusting to a new version of the story. I didn't rush to my car. I didn't need to. The silence I left behind would do more than shouting ever could. I hadn't insulted anyone. I hadn't explained myself. but I had broken the script. And for people who depend on control, that alone is collapse. Inside that room, I knew what was unfolding. They couldn't proceed as planned, not without my signature. Papers would be reviewed, explanations would be demanded. The smooth flow of the evening had just hit a rock that couldn't be moved quietly. They would scramble, likely behind closed doors, but it would show. The cracks would spread faster than anyone expected. Not because I had power, but because I withheld it. When I reached the car, I didn't feel triumphant. No rush of adrenaline, no fantasy of revenge, just stillness. The kind that comes when something final has occurred. I sat there for a moment before turning the key in the ignition. Let the engine settle into a quiet hum, like everything else had tonight. It was done. What came next would take time. Fallout always does. But the balance had shifted, and not just in the room I left behind. Something inside me had settled too. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to make things right. I wasn't looking for justice to arrive, wrapped in apology or explanation. I had chosen. Not with emotion, with clarity. And that kind of choice doesn't unravel. By the next morning, the phone started ringing, and this time, the tone was different. I didn't answer the first few. I let them roll to voicemail, curious more about how they'd speak than what they'd say. The shift was easy to spot. Gone was the urgency, the assertiveness. The words were softer, the edges filed down. "We'd just like to check in," or, "If you're open to it, we'd appreciate a quick conversation." Some didn't say much at all, just silence before hanging up. Others didn't reach out at all, and their silence said more. It felt like walking through the same town, but hearing a different song coming from the windows. I spent Sunday morning at the kitchen table, drinking coffee from the same mug I'd used for years. The air was cool through the screen door, the sounds of the street familiar and slow. That's when her name showed up on my phone. I didn't feel anything, not dread, not anger, just awareness. The voicemail came a few minutes later, polite, practiced. "I know things haven't been easy. I'd like to offer a proper apology. If you're open to a short conversation, I'd appreciate it." I sat with it until Tuesday. Then I called her back. We agreed to meet mid-morning, on neutral ground, a bench near the old library where we used to sit when things were simple, back when simplicity didn't come with fine print. She was already there when I arrived. Her hair was pulled back, dress carefully casual. She smiled in a way that tried not to assume anything. We exchanged small talk, weather, traffic, some vague mention of how fast everything's moving these days. Then she cleared her throat. "I owe you an apology." I didn't respond, just nodded once and waited. "I should have handled things differently," she said. "It got messy. I wasn't prepared. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, especially you." Her voice was calm, even measured, the kind of tone people use when they've rehearsed. She continued, "Looking back, I can see how you must have felt, but none of it was ever about making you the villain. I hope you know that." I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask questions. She looked at me as if expecting something. Relief, forgiveness, maybe a tear or two. What I gave her was silence. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because there was nothing left that needed fixing. An apology is only useful when both people still live in the moment it's trying to heal. I didn't. After a few quiet beats, I said, "Thank you for saying that," and stood up. That was it. We parted with a nod. No hug, no promises. It felt clean. Later that week, I passed by the florist on Walnut Street, the same shop that had delivered the centerpieces to the reception that never was. This time, though, the window display had changed. Late fall colors, burnt orange and deep rust, soft greens. I paused in front of it, and I realized something. The flowers didn't sting anymore. They didn't hold weight or expectation. They were just flowers, and that felt like proof. On Friday, I ran into the woman from the church, the one who'd offered me a kind word when no one else had. She was coming out of the grocery store, squinting into the light. She spotted me and smiled, brief but warm. "Good to see you," she said, adjusting her bag. "You too," I replied. No conversation followed. She didn't ask questions, didn't press for updates. Just a shared nod. A quiet recognition between people who had weathered things, each in their own way. That night, I sat in my home office and looked at an old picture, one taken years ago, back when I thought family was something you protected no matter what, even if it hurt. I thought about all the people who had come and gone, the ones who stayed for the wrong reasons, and the ones who left for the right ones. And I thought about the word family. What I once saw as a duty, I now saw as a choice. Family wasn't about proximity or paperwork. It was about presence, about showing up for the right reasons. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even sad. I was free. For a long time, I'd wondered if I had ruined something, if maybe I had been the mistake. But now I saw it clearly. I wasn't a mistake. I had just been misplaced. Walking away didn't make me smaller. It gave me back my name.